Welcome to our first asynchronous session on AI agents. Today, we're going to talk about the different ways in which information can be injected into the generative process of a large language model. These automated information injections will serve as an introduction to how AI agents work in general. The agent we built today could hardly deserve the name because it'll be very deterministic and predictable in its behavior. But it'll get us to see the building blocks from which more complex agents can be composed later on. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into the technicalities of it all and actually build a system in which an LLM pulls insights from a personal cache of documents that we upload. And this will help us build hands-on intuition on how models and data interact in general and all the ways that they could interact with the data. It will also provide insight on what toggles we have to augment this relationship and our final output. But before we do that, a quick plug from none other than our personal community. So it's great to see how on the Maven platform community, people have been vibrantly and lively interacting, but it is kind of unlikely that the conversation will continue once we end class and move on to new horizons. So instead, I highly encourage you to migrate your conversation onto our Discord page, the link to which will be provided in the comments below. Alright, back to the matter at hand. What we're going to do today is create a toy case which will showcase how all the different channels of information flow work through the model in generating our output. So let me explain what this toy use case is going to look like and the final deliverable, and then we can go back and break it down and reverse engineer how we pulled it all off. What we're going to do today is create a proposal generator. And generally, it's going to work like this. So this is what our final proposal generator is going to look like. Looks pretty simple, but trust me, there's a lot going on under the hood. So at the top here, we have an introduction saying this is our proprietary proposal generator. It relies on our strategic guide called Resilient Transformation. And it tells the user what to do. It says enter an innovation around which you would like to shape the proposal and specify the strategic stage that you think would be most relevant to the client, which to apply in shaping your proposal. So the proposal offers to implement an innovation for a client's company, and we specify what strategic stage out of our proprietary strategic guide we want to implement when advertising how we're going to implement this innovation. So, for example, our innovation could be anything like flying saucers, and our strategic stage could be, let's say, envision. I'll talk a little more about what these stages are, but they're kind of irrelevant to the general flow of things. As you can see, it writes us a fully fledged proposal, and it has an introductory paragraph talking about what the innovation is itself. Of course, this is a fictional one, so it's just doing its best to imagine what this could be, kind of threw it a curveball there. And then it talks about our company and how the Resilient Transformation Toolkit as a strategic guide is useful in general for applying this innovation. Then it goes into the specific stage that I specified. I clicked Envision, and as you can see, it's talking about Envision. It magically knows about what the Envision stage of our company guide is, even though the guide has never been on the internet or in any public place. Talks about how that specific stage is relevant to applying the innovation, and then talks about how flying saucers is part of a more general trend in robotics, drones, and autonomous vehicles. Nice job. And how Handshake is particularly useful for utilizing this kind of innovation for your profit needs. Our first method is our good old prompting method, where we just ask the model itself for the information. Just like the way you would ask the model, like, I don't know, how many colors are in a rainbow, and it just kind of spits out the answer at you from the nevers of its neural network. That's our first method of extraction, which I'm sure many of you are already quite familiar with. The second type of information injection is pulling data provided directly in the prompt, where you literally copied and pasted a relevant excerpt as an appendix to your instructions in the prompt. Third method, it is our good old RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generator, a concept into which we will delve deeper in just a second here. But to put it very broadly, a RAG is a way to insert a data injection program when passing your prompt to the model. So your data gets spliced in as a layer into your what is called app stack, into the different software that compose your application. So that way you can upload your own documents, PDFs, docx, and so on, and a model is able to give you a meaningful response with insight pulled from that data. And how it pulls off that magic, I will discuss in detail in just a second here. And the fourth method is the true Jedi Master level method, is the amalgamation of LLM and RAG in pulling information where an LLM governs how a RAG is to pull the data to best accommodate for the user's input. So there's a smart neural networky element to the way our RAG pulls the relevant data out of the documents we uploaded.
Is it possible to learn this power?
We're going to get to that in just a second. But first, let's look at how specifically these 4 kinds of data injection methods will play out in our final proposal generator. Alright, so as I said, the first paragraph just takes the innovation the user specified and elaborates on it. This is the type of information we get by just asking the model to pull insights from its own know-how about that innovation. The second paragraph will explain in general terms how a strategic plan which Handshake developed, called Resilient Transformation Toolkit, can be of a particular application to fostering the innovation that the user specified. In this section, the model generates from information that we copy-pasted directly into the prompt. Third paragraph will explain how a particular stage of Handshake's strategic guide can be applied to fostering the innovation the user specified. So we're no longer talking about the guides as a whole, but pulling information from a particular section of our guide. And to extract that relevant section from the document, we will use our RAG method. In the fourth paragraph, we'll talk about how the innovation specified is part of our larger tech trend. And here we'll use the interim LLM model to orchestrate the way our RAG is to perform. So let me dig in a little bit more as to what this fourth stage looks like. So here, the prompt is sent to a large language model, which classifies the prompt into some category. And then that category is used to search your document with the RAG tool. So for example, the user sends in an innovation called blockchain, and the LLM correctly classifies it under Web3. And then the RAG tool pulls all the information relevant to Web3 and sends it to the model to generate the proposal. So very briefly, and perhaps as a review, let's go over how a RAG works. And feel free to any second to skip forward in the video using the chapters below. So what happens to the documents you upload into your RAG is it gets cut up into different chunks. And these chunks are usually about a paragraph long. So RAG software just goes through your document and cuts it up like a butchering machine. Chunk, 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 paragraph by paragraph. Blindly, without the consideration for where the sentence ended or where a particular chapter ended or even where a particular paragraph ended. Just wherever it reached the specified length, it cuts it off, makes that into a chunk, and goes on throughout the rest of the document. When hard-coding a RAG tool from scratch, you can actually see these chunks in an Excel sheet. There's nothing magical about them. As you can see, this is just a chunked up document about some kind of consultation services. And as you can see, I specified that the chunk should be about 200 tokens long. And wherever it reached 200 and the end of a word, it didn't really care if there was a comma there or end of a sentence or if it was a paragraph or a page number. Wherever it reached 200 and something tokens, it cut it off and started a new chunk. These chunks get organized in a vector database, which, to put it in a single sentence, a vector database is kind of like a map of different words and concepts whose distance from each other correlates to how closely related they are to each other in meaning. So 2 points on this multidimensional map are close together if the content of these points is closely related to each other by what they mean. When using RAG software, we create a mini-map like this of your document. But each dot is not a separate word like it is in the original large language model, but a chunk that is just cut out of the original document. And so now there's this vector map where the different chunks are related to each other in the meaning that they possess. And because we took this extra step and made a map out of our chunks and relied on this whole RAG method, the functionality that we get in return is now whatever chunk is most relevant to the user's input, so whatever information they specified on the front end, that's the chunk that's going to be pulled and fed to the LLM for consideration. So if I have a big document that talks about many different technologies like Web3 and AI and flying drones and whatever, and the user specifically wants to know about the drones and they type into their query flying drones, the RAG tool is going to look for chunks. The RAG tool is going to look for chunks in the document that pertain to a discussion about flying drones. And then pull those chunks out, slap them into the prompt, and then send all that to the LLM. So an important thing to notice here is the LLM is still just receiving a prompt. It has no idea we went through this detour process of looking through a document and pulling chunks and slapping them into a prompt. The LLM still gets a prompt with a part that is instructions and a part that is chunks from a document pulled. What is great about this is that the LLM doesn't need to receive the entirety of the document that speaks about all of our different technological innovations. It only receives the parts of the document that specifically talk about drones or whatever the user is interested in. So it's quicker, cheaper, more efficient, and provides less irrelevant information to the model. So to really sink the entirety of a process into your brain, the process is as follows. 1. A user poses a question or some kind of input through a front end. The user's input is fed as a search query through the chunked up vector database that we created out of the documents you uploaded. And then, whatever the most relevant chunks are, those chunks are shoved into a backend prompt, which is a prompt that the user doesn't see, but which instructs the model on how to handle this chunk data. The chunk gets shoved into that prompt and then sent off to the model. And then the model in the end just receives a prompt enriched by these chunks. So here's a very rudimentary example of a customer relation advisor prompt where we give instructions, we identify where the user's input will be injected into the prompt, and we decide where the relevant chunks pulled from the document will be injected into that prompt. These little hashtags, by the way, these are markdown. They're just a quick and dirty way to assign titles and subtitles to sections of your document without having to rely on anything but plain text. Again, separate video on markdown down in the comments below. And so this backend prompt, which is compiled together with the user's input and the chunks that we pulled out, all that gets packaged together and sent off to the LLM to start generating. So what we get is a package of prompt plus relevant chunks gets sent to the model, and as a result, the model is able to generate coherent content that is informed by the most relevant excerpts out of your document. That's it on the mechanics. Now for the developmental process. I want to quickly walk you through the developmental process of how I made this app. And that way you can follow the general logic that I've applied here and create an application of your own. The first is what is called task decomposition, which breaks down the task we want to automate into discrete steps that would be easier to program in. When creating my proposal generator, I consciously looked at past proposals and consciously thought of what steps we took to compile those. Like, oh, okay, so I see that this paragraph I referred to this document, or maybe I just pulled it straight out of my brain. I laid out explicitly what I did and how I pulled it off and what outside sources I relied on in order to do what I did. Then I consciously chose the documents which I want spliced into my generator in order to enrich my conversation with the model. When choosing the document, there are a few best practices that I stuck to, and that is, you want your content to be representative. In other words, covering matters that are relevant to your application. Like if your document happens to have purely contextual content that isn't directly related to what the user will be searching for, you probably don't want to put that in. Feel free to go in and just delete those pages out of the PDF if you don't think there will be any use for them in the generative process. Also, garbage in, garbage out. The writing style and informativeness of your generated output will be impacted by the quality of the documents you upload. So you want to make sure they're from reputable authors and well written. Principle number 2. Repetition of key concepts is a good thing. It's good when core concepts are constantly brought up again and again throughout your document. It gives your vector dataset clusters around which the chunks gather. This improves outputs in response to user queries which are relevant to those specific concepts and those specific clusters. Principle number 3, and this one's not so obvious. You want things to be in the same time period and of relatively the same level of importance. It'll be really difficult to set things up so the model will comprehend in any feasible way the whole notion of before and after, or that this thing was true at some point but isn't true anymore. Just make sure that the content is just pure facts that is true right now and does not have any variability of level of truthfulness or timescale. Principle number 4, make sure you have the right to use the content you are inserting, otherwise, well, you'll know how Sam Altman feels. Advice number 5, avoid PDFs if you can. PDFs look like convenient and modifiable text file to your human eye, but to a computer, it's just an image file. In fact, it's even worse than an image file because it's clogged with all this unrelated metadata. So the computer has to convert the image into a text file using some special software. The conversion is never direct, there's always some lossiness involved. Then the RAG is tasked with chunking up these lossy processed datasets, trashed with metadata inside, and the whole thing just becomes a mess. All that being said, it's a minor quality loss in majority of cases, so if you have no other choice, PDFs will do. Okay, so at this point, I've laid out the strategy of how I complete the task. I broke it up into specific steps. I consciously thought of all the documents that I would be using. Now I can go ahead and compile my prompt. During the hands-on exercise, you'll get to see what the anatomy of a prompt like this is. But I must forewarn you, I didn't just make this prompt on my first try. I have 3 years of prompting behind my back, and nonetheless, I had to test and tweak what I made many times to make sure my prompt is what is called stable, or it returns good results to whatever the user decides to query it with. It's difficult to determine when you have arrived at a stable prompt because models are inherently unpredictable. That's kind of their strength and their Achilles heel. And the solution to battling this unpredictability is you need to do a lot of testing and gauging the fail rate. Try many different inputs as if you were the user and assess the quality of the outputs. What's most likely is going to happen is maybe even your first prompt is going to get you a lot of good hits and a lot of good responses, but in 10% of cases, and they might be edge use cases, you might get back something nonsensical, and then you have to go back and adjust your backend prompt to accommodate for those flaws. By explicitly saying hey, when you get this kind of question, don't do this, which is a failing thing you did before, do this instead. Things get pretty convoluted pretty quickly and hard to test when your prompt is big, so best advice is to start very small with a single test input and testing just one functionality of your prompt, and then iterate on the prompt and add additional functionalities once you've made sure that initial output delivers on what your expectations are.
And with that, we'll wrap up our conceptual element of the async class and move into the hands-on practice.
Alright, so what we're going to do is go to trypromptly.com, that's T-R-Y promptly, as in expediently.com. I'm already logged in, but you would go through a login process, which you can connect with your Google account, or it's just a general login process. Once logged in, you're going to appear on a page that looks like this. And you're going to hover all the way to the left here and click on the apps option right here. First time you log in, it'll probably barrage you with a bunch of efforts to help you through the process. You just exit out of those as fast as you can because I'm here to guide you through the entire thing. From here, you want to hover over to the bar on the left called categories, not the far left, but the near far left, which says categories, says all blank agents and so on, and click on blank. It'll give you 3 options, of which you will choose chatbot for now. We will dive into agents later. It'll ask you for a name. I'll just give mine proposal generator. Just like that. And we're ready to start creating our app. It'll show you an error message by default. Don't get discouraged by that. That's just because we didn't create any of the elements that it's looking for to have a minimum viable app. These boxes you see, of which there are 2 for now, but you can make more of, these are different links in the process. So each one of these steps does something. Right now we have only 2 steps, one showing the user fields that they can fill out, and another one doing something and outputting something to the front end where the user can see it. There's nothing in between because our app is not doing anything yet. We're just starting from a clear slate. And what Promptly makes possible is in between the user putting something in and getting something back, you can add all of these different programs which do all kinds of things with the input, including processor with a large language model, or send it to your Google, or send it to a video generator, and so on and so forth. And we're going to use this setup in order to link all kinds of processes, including a RAG tool, including an interim LLM orchestrator for a RAG tool, including a backend prompt. We're going to use Promptly to link all these processes together in a logical way where one hands off whatever it did for information to the next piece, and down the links the processor will go until we have a full-fledged proposal come out in this window, application output, and show it back to the user. On the left, we have some options. We have an editor, which is where we link things together. Preview, which is where we get to see our app the way it is today. History, which is a history of how your app has been used before. Versions, which is the different versions that we save as we go through the editor. And by the way, you can do that back in the editor section down here. Every time you click Save App, it saves a new version. And integrations, this is just the way you can slap in whatever you created into your personal page, into your website or API or Discord or into your Slack page or whatever. Really cool thing about Promptly is without any upfront payment, you can publish whatever you made and make it a public web page, so then you can share the links to that page with your friends and actually show off what you made, which is pretty cool. Most other platforms ask for money in order to have that kind of capability, but Promptly is very generous in that regard. All right, so let's build our app. What we're going to do is add a field for the inputs. So window, or I should say processor, that's the official name. Processor number 1, which says chatbot. It's a chat application with embeddable widgets, blah, blah, blah. In the first option in the chatbot processor, it has the option add field, the blue button. It should be smack in the middle of your screen. Click that. So now it's asking for like, okay, so what input field do you want to float up to the user? And under name, I'll say innovation description. So this is where the user is gonna input their innovation, whatever they want, flying saucers, drone technology or whatever, input their field, and it's gonna be processed through the rest of the app. Description is purely there for the user, so the user will understand what to do over here. So I'm gonna say, describe the innovation you would like to write a proposal about. Okay, string is just free text input. Great, so we made that. At any point you want to see how what you created is turning out on the front end, all you need to do is scroll down and click Save App. Make sure not to forget this step. Oh, and by the way, the name you give to the saved app is arbitrary. It doesn't really matter. You can give it whatever name you want or no name at all. Make sure to save your app and only then click Preview, because if you go straight to Preview, then annoyingly enough, all your effort is going to be erased.
A little quirk I've discovered with Promptly after playing with it for a little bit is that I actually wouldn't let you save the app twice if you don't add a middle step first. So it'll save it successfully the first time, but if you try to do it again, it's not going to save it. In order to continue saving it the second time and all the times afterwards, you need to add a processor in the middle, so a link in between chat input and application output. And it could be any link you want for now. We'll just delete it later. So you could just click processor here, and it'll add a step in the middle. And then if you click save app, now it'll save it. It'll show you the modifications we've made recently.
And voila, we have a user input. It says innovation description as the title of the input, which moves up ahead when we actually try to type something in. And below it gives a little specifier what to do with this. Describe the innovation you would like to write a proposal about. Great. Just as a reminder, this is what our final app is going to look like. So it's going to have an intro message, and then it's going to have two inputs. One's the innovation description, what we just made, and the other is strategic stage, which, as you can see, is a drop-down menu, which, if you recall, will be used to shape paragraph 3, where we apply a particular stage from a strategic guide we made, which we will upload in the back end in a second here. All right, so back to the editor. We have our innovation description. Let's add another field. And this field is going to be called strategic stage. And then I'll add a specifier, identify the stage of innovation development most relevant to the client. And that would be identify, which is the why do the innovation, envision, which is what innovation you would like to manifest and how, and transform as to how you would actually want to make it into a real world application. Strategic stage, description, type is not going to be a string. String is just a free-form input, but we don't want that. We want select. And when we click that, we have additional options. Now, the syntax in how you want to specify these options is a little strange. And if you deviate from it just a little bit, everything's going to break. So make sure to do exactly what I'm doing here. And by the way, I should have definitely said this earlier. All the text that you are seeing here is on the Notion page. Again, linked at the bottom of the video. So if you want to make sure everything is error-proof, just type in. You can just copy and paste into every single one of these slots, specifically what's written on the Notion page, by doing the magic of Control-C, Control-V, or Command-C, Command-V if you're on Apple. So the way I'll specify my option is label 1, I'm going to say identify, and then I'm going to do colon and write the word identify again. So what this does is, the first word is what the user is going to see up front on their drop-down menu right here, identify. The second word is what's going to be fed into the program when the user chooses that option. So I could say here something else entirely, like ice cream. And every time the user clicks identify on the front end, ice cream is what's going to be sent to the back end through the rest of the process. Luckily for us, everything we want to send in the back end is exactly what the user is going to click on the front end, so we're just going to write the same thing for twice. Identify colon identify comma space envision colon envision comma space transform colon transform. That's it. So as I said, identify, envision, transform are the 3 stages of a strategic guide that we made. And what we're going to do here is when the user selects a specific section of strategic guide, we're going to pull that content from our personal documentation and feed it to the model so it can write specifically how innovation can be applied with that strategic stage. Great. Now we're going to obsessively save the app because it never hurts. And we can preview it. Voila! Now we have 2 inputs. One's a freeform input, we're going to say whatever we want, and one's a drop-down menu out of 3 options. Of course, if we click submit, nothing happens because we didn't program the app to do anything. Alright, we're going to stay in the chatbot window. What I'm going to do now is scroll down until it says welcome message, and in here I'm going to paste like an introductory message from the app explaining what this proposal generator does and what the user is supposed to input into the fields. So again, please copy and paste this from a Notion page. Don't go writing this by hand. But it says just welcome to Handshake's proposal generator that applies the resilient transformation toolkit methodology to a client's innovation of interest and shapes a proposal around the consultation service. Enter an innovation around which you would like to shape the proposal and the stage of strategic development most relevant to the client. The stages of strategic development are as follows. Identify why participant identifies how the underlying purpose of venture connects to their innovation. Envision what, develop a concrete deliverable, and transform how, develop a concrete strategy on how to implement the innovation. So I gave a very quick lowdown to the user as to what the options mean that they can input and what this thing is going to do for them. So the front end is done. And there's really not many options on Promptly to like tweak a front end as you like it. You'd have to like go into advanced and actually code it up. But what we have will do for now. Okay, so we have our 2 links that are chatbot and our application output. So next, let's program up our simple RAG tool for paragraph 3, which, if you recall, is a part of a process where the RAG tool considers the stage of strategic development that the user chose, pulls that relevant data out of a document, sends it to the LLM, so the LLM can apply that specific strategic stage to the innovation that the user specified.
And since we added a dummy link in between link 1 and 3 so we can save the app, we're going to want to delete that. So whatever link you added, this process is the same. What you want to do is go to that second link that you've added. Go to the very right until you see this trash can. Click on the trash can and it's gone. And so now we can proceed with adding the RAG link, which is the actual link that we want.
And the way we would add that RAG option is by going down over here in between the 2 links. So your window will probably look like this. And we're going to stay with Promptly. As you can see, it has many other different options. We're going to stay with Promptly. Instead of backend, we're going to do data source search, which is Promptly's proprietary RAG tool. We're going to click processor. Now, our first thing it's going to ask is what query do we want to send to the document? As in, like, what are we looking through the document for? Which, if you remember, in our case, would be the user selection of identify, envision, or transform. So this could be a static query. It could be like always search for rainbows. And if I type in rainbows, it'll just, no matter what happens, it'll search the document for the same keywords and pull out the same chunks no matter what. But we don't want a static query. We want a dynamic query which responds to what the user chosen. So instead we're going to click on the query box. This yellow option box will show up which says template variables. And it'll have only one option input. So we're going to click on that. It'll have more options to choose from, which is the 2 inputs that the user can offer in the front end, which is the innovation description, the free-form description of their innovation, and strategic stage, which is one of the 3 options that I offered to them. So we're going to click strategic stage. I'm going to write the word stage afterwards. And this gray box, it's a variable, which means the input here changes according to like what happened earlier in the app. So if the user chose identify, the word identifier will show up here because that's my variable specifier. If they chose envision, the word envision will go in here. So the data source search is going to search for whatever option they chose on the front end. Next, and under configuration, it'll ask me for the document that I want to search. And so here, when you click data sources here, yours list is going to be empty because you haven't uploaded any documents yet. So what we're going to have to do here is save the app. Make sure to save the app so you don't have to go through all that again. Save version. You'll get an option that says app updated successfully. And now we can navigate away from this page and come back to it later. So what you're going to do is, again, hover on the very far left. As you can see, it says Home, Apps, Playground, Data, or Data. I never know which one's right. But you're going to click on Data. Again, yours is going to be empty. It's not going to have any of these options. And now we're going to add some documents. As I said before, all the content you need is on the Notion page. And the documents are there too. So the two documents, one about the identify, envision, transform process, and the other about the tech trends, are both living there. So go ahead and navigate to the Notion page and download those documents before proceeding. Okay, so now the documents are on my local computer. I'm going to click Add Data Source. It's going to ask me for a data source name, which is there for purely internal use. I'll just call it Identify, Envision, Transform. Whatever you call it, it's circumstantial, doesn't really matter. I'm going to choose file because I did my homework and actually found a docx version and not a PDF of this file. I'm going to click on this box down here and select my file out of my personal computer, which is likely in the downloads folder. Voila, selected the document, and now I'm going to just click submit. And we've sent the document to the butcher. So now that's going to get it all chunked up and laid out as separate pieces on a vector database, which we can then query according to its semantic content. That process is going to take some time. As you can see, it's still loading. So while it's doing that, we can navigate back to our app. So again, far left, Home, Apps, Playground, click Apps. Find your apps among the list of apps that you've previously created, which most likely is none. As you can see here, my list is much more comprehensive because I've been playing around with Promptly for quite a bit before this class. And I'm going to choose the app that I just created, which actually for you is probably untitled, which is Poor Hygiene. Let's click on this little pencil button over here and give it a unique name. This is just in case you haven't done that right off the bat when you started creating the app. But here's the progress we've made so far. And so there's the chatbot, which is a front end, and data source search. So let's click on that. As you can see, it has a strategic stage specifier, and now we can choose our data source. So let's click on that. If you remember, I named my data source Identify, Envision, Transform, which is the option right here. Your whatever name you had will pop up here for you too. Click on that, and we are done. There's additional options here, like the document limit, which is how many chunks you wanted to pull out of a document. And the default is 4. So it'll find 4 chunks most relevant to either identify, envision, or transform and pull those out. I don't want 4 because the document itself is pretty small. I'm going to choose 3. In case you didn't indulge your curiosity and don't know what the content of a document is, it looks like this. As you can see, it has the descriptions of identify, envision, transform. I wrote this many, many moons ago. It's been sitting around, and I said, why not? Let's use this. And so nothing special about the document. So that all got chunked up, and now we selected it for our RAG tool, and we're done with our generic RAG step. Now we're gonna code up or I shouldn't say code up because we're in a no-code tool. We're gonna program the part where the LLM orchestrates what the RAG tool does. And that's still a little confusing to you. Once you see it at play, it's all going to become very clear. So as we said, the first step is the model becomes the orchestrator. So let's choose the model. So let's go back and add another processor. Yours probably says Promptly backend. Let's click on Promptly. And out of all the options that we have, click OpenAI, which is right above Promptly. And then out of the options specific to OpenAI, where it says backend, out of all of these options, you're going to click ChatGPT and click processor. And we have our third step in our process. So now we've just created a function in our app which reaches out to a large language model, which, if you think about it, is pretty cool. The information we will be sending to the large language model, in this case OpenAI's ChatGPT, is a system message and a user prompt. System prompt is a prompt like any other, but it usually is used to set the tone, get the model to assume a particular role, and other background considerations. What's special about the system prompt is it gets appended to every single prompt that the user writes afterwards. And for this part, we will use just a generic prompt, which is "You are a helpful assistant." All right, so we're done with the system prompt. Now let's write up the content for this prompt. So the main prompt lives under message, and the role is going to be user, and then the prompt itself is going to go in this content window. And in this content, we're going to explain to the model how it's supposed to orchestrate the RAG tool that we're going to program out in a second. So what we'll want is for the model to accept the prompt that the user put in and classify it into one of 12 categories. And then those categories will be what is queried to the RAG tool. And because classifying an open-ended, unlimited amount of options into a set of 12 classifications is not something you could program into a deliberate or deterministic program, we're going to rely on the language model to use its magical semantic powers in order to do that for us. Here's the prompt itself. Again, you can find this in your Notion database. And it says, deciding to which innovation type from list innovation types is the user's input. So this is going to become a variable, and it's going to say whatever the user put in the front end. Return only the name of the innovation type. Do not generate any additional content besides the output. I'm saying this because, models have this tendency where you ask it a simple question and it gives you the simple answer, but then it elaborates on and this is why I chose this answer, and this is my logic, and thank you so much, and goodbye, and hello. We don't need all that. That's going to just clog up our RAG tool with a bunch of unnecessary keywords. So I'm going to reiterate multiple times for it to only return the innovation type and nothing else. And I'm going to specify these 16 innovation types from which it can choose. Again, as you can see, I use Markdown to mark this as a title. Hashtag space means title in Markdown. And the model catches on to that and understands that this is a title. And so when I say from the list under title innovation types, it understands that I'm talking about this part. Very nifty trick to organize and sort your prompts. And so now I'm going to copy this, and again, copy this from your Notion, plop it in here, and instead of user input 1, I'm going to put in the user's input from front end, so innovation description. So if you recall, that is what this input right here is called. This input right here. So the user puts in flying saucers. Flying saucers is what's going to be slapped into here. Great, so now we have this classifier. It's going to spit out only the name of one of these chapters. You can see it has additional options here, which is what model do you want to use, GPT 3.5, max tokens, temperature. Again, there's a separate video explaining what all these toggles are. I'm going to see if the smaller, cheaper model is going to pull this off, because it's not only cheaper, it's also faster than the almighty GPT-4. And so if you're performing a task that a smaller model could pull off, then it's a good idea to rely on that model and just have it pull off that task. And a really cool trick is that I can actually test this step and see if it works, because all I need to do is for the output is to be whatever ChatGPT classification of that step outputs to me. all I need to do is for the output, which I specify in the last step, which is step 4 right now, application output, I want the output to be whatever ChatGPT in step 3 spat out, which is one of those classifications. And the way I'm going to do that is, again, output template, this yellow window is going to pop up. I'm going to click ChatGPT, messages, content. It has a bunch of different options. Content is what the model returns. If it generated content, it returns back to you. And so just like that, I'm going to save my app. I'm going to click preview. And now let's see if it correctly classifies my inputs. I'm going to click blockchain. Should return Web3 by 3. Good job. I'm going to say video games. It should return entertainment. Come on. Yes, GPT 3.5, you're on it. And now, how about let's see, try flying saucers. Just to really throw a curveball. Space. Yes. Good job, GPT 3.5. I can get away with a cheaper model now. Editor. Great. So step 3 works like a charm. And now what do we need to do? Well, we need to feed these classifications, whatever the model spat out as whatever classification the input best falls into, we need to feed that into the RAG tool. So let's program that up. Again, we're going to add a new processor. It's going to be from promptly, data source search. This all looks familiar. The input is going to be whatever ChatGPT classification is in step 3. So again, just like for the output, I'm going to ChatGPT, messages, content. We're good to go. Data source. Again, we didn't make a data source yet, so I'm going to save the app, just like we did before. Save that version. App saved successfully. Yes, I hope it was, because I don't want to lose all this work. Go back to data. Again, download this file from the Notion page before you proceed here. Add data source. This one is a PDF. I'm sorry, I tried far and wide to look for a version of this document that is not a PDF, but my hands are tied here. I only have a PDF version. I'm going to call this Tech Trends list. Select the PDF. Select the PDF. It's a big document. It looks like this. It's just an open access report on different tech trends. It's a whopping 979 pages and has a lot of information, and it has 16 chapters, which are artificial intelligence, metaverse, so on and so forth. These are exactly the 16 classifications which I said ChatGPT to classify the user's input into. And so, as you could guess, what's going to happen is ChatGPT is going to classify the user's input as into one of these chapters. The RAG is going to go into that chapter and pull out whatever relevant content is related to that keyword, which is probably like many chunks from that chapter alone, and then feed it back to the model as context. All right, so let's click submit here. Again, it's going to go chunk away. It's going to take a while, so I'm going to just go back to the app and continue where I left off. Now I can go back to data source search. In the data source search, we're going to keep the query as is. We're going to scroll down to configurations, data sources, and now we can select tech trends list from the data list that we made earlier. And for the amount of chunks, I'm actually bump this up to 6, or actually even 7, because it is a pretty big document, and there's going to be a lot of relevant chunks. I'll keep it down to 6. A lot of relevant chunks out of that chapter that would be of use to the model in order to generate its output. We're done with this step. And with that, our second and last RAG step is set up. And now, to pull it all together and orchestrate it into a fully functional app, we're gonna add our last ChatGPT step. So again, this is the last processor that's gonna handle all of this data fed into it. It's gonna handle the data fed into from the traditional RAG tool. It's gonna handle the information handed over by It's going to handle information offered by the traditional RAG tool. It's going to handle information offered by the LLM orchestrating a RAG tool system. And it's going to add its own instructions in order to tell the model, okay, so like this is what it do for first paragraph, second paragraph, pull information from here, pull information from there. All of that is going to be contained in our last step. So let's go ahead and select OpenAI, ChatGPT, and click processor. So the system message and the content is going to be much more nuanced here than what we have in the third step. The system message is going to have all of this background information that it offers to the model. So it says you're a consultant in Handshake, an AI consultancy, tasked with developing a proposal. Nothing new there. And then it gives it the tone and the context into which it is going to receive the instructions that are to come. So it says, speak in a professional, informative tone. Explain your proposal to me like I'm a CEO. Do not be overly salesy or exuberant. Don't boast or advertise, because they just smear on like super thick layer of like joy and exuberance, and it sounds like an ad campaign. So I tell it not to do that. Give it some examples on like the type of cheesy statements which it should avoid. And so that's our system message. So we're going to copy that. Again, you would copy that from the Notion page. As is. No variables here. Just insert that the way you want. Of course, you can be creative here and have the user like specify the tone for the model and just insert a variable for one of these, but we're not going to get into that. All we want is the user to specify the innovation and the strategy type. All right, so we're done with the system message. Let's scroll down to messages, user content, and specify our body of our prompt. The prompt is quite extensive, as you can see. It takes up an entire 2 pages, and there's a lot going on. But this isn't coding, this isn't C++, this is plain English, so we can see exactly what's going on by straight up just reading the prompt. So your task is to write a proposal on innovation provided by the user. This is going to be a variable, which we will make a variable once we paste it into the main window. The innovation will be referred to as provided innovation throughout the instructions below, so I don't have to like reiterate the variable over and over again. I'm just going to say provided innovation later on, and the model is going to know, it's going to treat it like a variable, because I told it just refer to this as provided innovation from here on out. I'm going to tell it that the layout of a plan or of a proposal should be as follows. And so recall from way back in the beginning that our first paragraph is just asking to explain the innovation on the best of the model's knowledge, to pull the knowledge directly out of a model's brain. And so that's what's happening here. It's saying the first paragraph should summarize provided innovation and how it can have a disruptive impact on a particular market in the future. So no magic here, no additional information. We're literally just asking the model to pull from its own insights. Second paragraph should introduce Handshake and describe how its Resilient Transformation Toolkit will help develop the provided information. And is going to talk about the company and what this Resilient Transformation Toolkit is. And I tell it that the described toolkit and the information that you're looking for in order to elaborate on innovation is under the heading about Resilient Transformation Toolkit. And so again, I'm using Markdown to have a separate section that has the exact same title about Resilient Transformation Toolkit. And in there, I just pasted the information from a summary about the toolkit that I had laying around. And I have a separate section which talks about the company. And as you can see here, I mentioned both these titles. In here, I just say pull from the description under the title blank or under the heading blank, and specify where it's supposed to pull this information and make it relevant. So this is the second time retrieval where we provided information in the prompt itself. Third paragraph is where we get sassy and involve a RAG tool. So let's see how that worked. We're saying in a third paragraph, describe how Handshake could guide the client through the specific stage of the toolkit called user input 2. So remember, user input 2 is this input right here. This is user input 1, freeform, user input 2, identify, envision, transform. And so when we see user input 2, what's actually going to go here is either identify, envision, or transform. And I'm going to say use relevant information under the heading stage description below to craft a process for fostering the provided information. Remember how I told you that the LLM has no idea that we're using all these RAG tools and all these complex information injection methods? In the end, it's still just getting a prompt. Well, this final backend prompt is going to handle the chunks as if it's just another insertion into the prompt. We're going to handle it just like we did in the second paragraph with just titles and information. And as you can see, we're saying use relevant information under heading stage description below to craft a process for fostering a provided innovation. And below we have a section named stage description. Only, what do you know? It's blank. There's nothing in there. We didn't paste any static information in there. Because what's going to go in here is, as you might have guessed by now, the chunks that are going to be relevant to the user's input that are going to be pulled from the document. So, user puts in a query, the data source search pulls in the chunks that are most relevant to that query, and then it's going to slap them under here. And so the model is going to receive just another heading and another enriched piece of prompt and another piece of data on which to rely on, and use that to generate the third paragraph. And the fourth paragraph looks exactly the same in the prompt. It has no idea that there's this complex process of an LLM orchestrating the RAG and then the RAG pulling the chunks and then putting them in here. In our backend prompt, it's just like section 1 and 2. It's just a specifier that something is going to be showing up under the heading General Tech Trends, and there's this section General Tech Trends where where those chunks are going to appear. So again, the user is going to put in an input. The ChatGPT is going to classify it into one of 16 chapters. We're going to pull information from that chapter, shove it in here, and so our enriched prompt, which is going to be complete with the user's input, with whatever stage they decided, with information about that stage, with information about a relevant text trend. All that's going to be compiled together and then sent off to the model. And so now all we need to do is copy these instructions, not the system message, just the instructions, content, paste it in there, and then replace these variables with actual dynamic variables. So I'm going to delete user input 1 and select input, innovation description, see dynamic variable. I'm going to replace user input 2 with input strategic stage. So that's a dynamic variable now. And I'm going to scroll down and look for the other dynamic variables that I've got. Okay, so stage description. That's going to be the output of the first RAG, which is step 2. So stage description under step 2, which says answers text. So that's the option we want. So let me show you for the second one too. Remember, under stage description, we want the second data source search. Under general text trend, we want the fourth data source search because that's the one that's orchestrated by the LLM and searches through the text trend document. Data source search, answers text only. So we always want to select the answers text, not just answers, but the answers text option. Make sure to do that. And make sure to choose the right data source, the one that's actually relevant to that section. And that's it. We just made our app. Oh, we should probably specify the output should be whatever the model generates as a final step. So we're going to go to application output, ChatGPT, number 5, because that's the last step, messages, content. I'm going to save this app. We're going to go to preview and drum rolls. Let's type in blockchain and use stage 3, which is direct implication. Click submit. It's going to microwave inside the internet and inside the model's brain for a little bit, and then it's going to give us, hopefully, a coherent proposal. We're almost there. It gave me these titles, which I thought I asked it not to in the system message. Maybe I forgot to do that. So let's go back. This is a prime example of how you test run and double check. And in the system message for the second generator, we're going to say, do not add any headings to each chapter. Just write out the proposal in essay format. So this is beautiful because you don't need any of this arcane knowledge in order to just error-proof your application. You just literally look at what didn't work and write in plain English on how to patch that and accommodate for that error. Let's try that again. Let's say drones this time, and we'll choose identify. Submit. Alright, it kind of flopped the delivery on the first paragraph, which I'm quite surprised because, oh, I know what it is. Okay, so one more thing. When you are generating your content, you want the best of the best model. That was generated by GPT 3.5. That's not going to do. So I'm going to go to step 5, scroll all the way down, configuration GPT 3.5 Turbo, no. GPT 4, oh, the best of the best. That's what I want. Save version. Okay, so again, a nice lesson on how different models differ in their delivery. All right, drones, strategic stage, envision this time. Submit. I was wondering, I was like, usually the model is more informed about all these innovations. There you go. Disrupt several, drones have a capacity to disrupt several industries, logistics, agriculture, surveillance. Whoa, way smart. Autonomous, semi-autonomous aerial vehicles, that's very smartly said. Drones have a potential to transform how businesses and government approach. Okay, so paragraph 1, achieved with flying colors. I think you can agree. Paragraph 2, where it pulls information directly provided in the prompt. So what is Handshake? Describes it in flying colors. Then it talks about the toolkit, and is talking about group exercises, conducting research, and they say mind shift towards future-oriented thinking. I see that it didn't mention drones in this paragraph, which I'm kind of irked about. I should have mentioned drones. The way I could fix this is by providing a full-fledged example as one of the sections. So I would say like, all right, so write this, follow these instructions. At the very end, I was like, try to emulate these examples. Don't emulate like the style or anything. Just emulate the structure and the way I'm inserting the innovation into the strategic process. And that would go a long way in making this more creative and more informed and actually bake in the innovation into the description of the toolkit. I didn't do that here now because that I'm going to have to write a full proposal from scratch. But that is an option that is available to you. You would just use markdown language, hashtag space example, explain to it that this is an example, and then write out a full proposal, the best of the best, the way you can write it. But let's see how it did on the second stage. So then it's going to say, to guide the client through the envision stage of Resilient Transformation Toolkit, Handshake will begin by reviewing the outcomes of low-resolution prototypes, true story. Chapter 4 is where it really never stops to surprise me in how good it returns the content, because it's now talking about how drones are part of a more general tech trend, and it's pulling all of that information from like the chapter of that 900 page document about this tech trend. And so it's talking about improvement in battery technology and artificial intelligence and how all those things are going to work together to foster this innovation further. And then and goes out of a bang talking about how Handshake is this awesome company and how its specific assets and services will help this company foster its innovation. And so if you followed the steps, you just created your first AI app. And in some ways, it's quite an agentic app because it decides on what classification the user's input goes into. It kind of autonomously, if you can say so, decides which chapter to pull from and integrates all of that information in a way where you get a full-fledged proposal. It's kind of an agent because there is a step where it is making its own decision. So that's why we're on our way into the horizon where we're going to make more sophisticated agents. I'm sure proposal generation is not exactly what you arrived here for, and even if it is, it would not be using the same documents or the same prompt layout. But I hope what you saw here today will show you and get your gears turning about how you use information into your workflow and how you can automate those information injections into a large language model in a way where it's versatile, it makes its own choices, it makes decisions as to how to guide the information flow best, and then it uses RAG to parse through these giant information caches. And by the way, each one of these data sets doesn't have to be one document. It could be 5, 10 documents. It could be a whole library. Parses through all that information and pulls out the most relevant chunks and informs the LLM as to what to generate next. With that, thank you for joining and coming with me on this journey. I hope you got something very interesting out. Next week we're going to talk about function calling and how the model can make more deliberate choices like search the web or reach into your Notion page or your calendar and see the information there and make decisions as needed. We're going to take that step with Zapier Central, so please stay tuned and I look forward to seeing you next week.